In country clubs and the back rooms of pubs, in homes, homesteads and halls right across the West Australian wheat belt, you'll find Julian Krieg and his team from Working with Warriors.
When we're talking about men, we really need to acknowledge that there's a whole lot of elements to men. And one of the elements that really gets blokes into a fair bit of trouble is this warrior attitude.
Working with Warriors is an educational program that's about helping rural men and women better understand the male psyche, to recognise the warning signs of depression and anxiety.
Stress is part of living, and sometimes those stresses are exaggerated by things like a drought, because most of my work is in the wheat belt. But stress is real, and warriors don't look after their health really well.
In a clear and uncomplicated way, in everyday language, using yarns and the occasional joke, Working with Warriors is about unravelling the logic that makes rural men think and behave the way they do.
It's presented by somebody who clearly understands and relates to his audience. He's not a medical expert, he's just a bloke who knows a bit about how blokes feel, and that's how it's presented. It's presented in a language that they can understand, with a lot of humour and a lot of anecdotal information so that they immediately relate to it. They see, oh yeah, that's me. He's a mate. He's somebody who can sit there and talk to them like one of their mates.
Working with Warriors explores why rural men take risks, why they sometimes abuse themselves and others physically and emotionally, why they compromise their health and safety, and what they can do about it.
Most blokes have got three mates and people they can talk to in their life. Their partner, usually a mentor or a dad or someone, and a mate. 3 people. We have a lot of associates, but not many people we're prepared to spill our guts to, know who they are.
John Sudals is a wheat and sheep farmer who's been dealing with depression for more than 20 years. John's health declined so slowly he didn't realise what was happening.
I don't think these days I've got too many enemies in life, but if I did have, I wouldn't wish that went through on them. But it was pretty ordinary, you know, not being able to sleep, pacing the floor in the middle of the night, going to work to do my farm work and procrastinating, not making decisions, doing things over and over again, you know, check the sheep today, check the sheep tomorrow, check the sheep the next day.
Even as a young man, John Sudals was well known as a farmer and a champion footballer with the old VFL club South Melbourne. John felt under pressure to live up to the achievements of his father and grandfather, who'd both been leaders in the community. By the time he'd reached his 40s, that pressure was taking its toll.
Like, I just isolated myself. I wouldn't answer the phone. We were coming up to shearing. It was a good season. I got my team organised, and things were going along, and you know, everything was going right, but I still wasn't happy.
In 1988, as John Sudals readied for another day of shearing, things came to a dramatic head. After months of relentless stress and fractured sleep, he was on the brink of a breakdown.
That morning I had got to the wool shed at 5 a.m. Now, what would anybody go to the wool shed at 5 a.m. for? But I woke up at 2 o'clock and couldn't sleep, so I might as well have let my wife sleep. So I got out of bed and paced around, and then I thought, well, bugger this, I'll go down to the wool shed.
For many farmers, it's a familiar cycle of work, exhaustion and anxiety. John Sudals was so tired and stressed he was barely able to function, yet he had no idea he was suffering from depression. His uncle arrived just as John broke down.
And he turned up just to see how the shearing was going, and he walked in the door and I just cried. I just broke down and I just could not, that was the finish. I just said to him, look, I've got to go, I need help.
John received that help and expert care in a city hospital, but he was nervous coming home, worried what people would think of him.
Unless you've been there, and it's hard to understand how it would be so difficult for a bloke like me to walk into the local newspaper agency and ask for the morning paper. And yet it really took a lot of courage for me to lift myself up to just do that.
But John's fears were misplaced. A mate spotted him and wandered over to welcome him home, a small gesture that left a lasting impression. I'm
sitting there in the passenger seat beside the supermarket actually, and sort of he walked up to me and he just said, "G'day Jumbo," he said, "it's good to see you back in town." And that was, I've never forgotten that, like he probably has, but I haven't.
There's much more to a man than just that winning type attitude, but the focus is very much in our modern culture on that winning, and we've almost come full circle to where that warrior stuff comes to the top, and so that sense of loss becomes a real problem for men.
Claire and Harry Taylor turned to working with warriors to cope with a family tragedy. Only days after their daughter Lee underwent major surgery related to cancer, Lee's husband was killed in a road accident.
He didn't usually speed in his farm ute, he always wore his seatbelt. He was obviously going quicker than he should have, and he didn't have his seatbelt on. Now that was pure pressure. And he said to his mate, "Oh, I've got to get home to Lee and the boys." And that was the last thing he ever actually said to anyone. That was pressure, and I really believe people hitting trees, driving when they're tired, whatever, they're under too much pressure.
The Taylors were devastated and struggled to cope. They sought help and were encouraged to talk about the awful grief they were going through.
Julian just gave us basically the permission to feel how we felt, react how we were reacting, and made us realise that it was normal to be doing what we were doing.
To be able to talk to somebody, whether they say anything or whether they listen or not, just being able to talk to somebody about what the problem is makes the problem sort of not as big a mountain as what you anticipated it was.
The Taylors are convinced the warrior attitude flourishes in country Australia and is the reason many rural men won't confront their problems.
You can't say, our relationship's fallen apart, my wife doesn't love me. That is probably 90% of the problem. And it's sad because it happens to so many people.
Three years ago, Marty Grant had had enough. A young farmer struggling to make ends meet, battling drought, failed crops, relationship issues, he felt helpless and worthless. In his eyes, he was a failure.
I got to a stage where I just wanted to stay in bed and not do anything, go anywhere. I wasn't sleeping, became angry, moody, totally opposite to my normal nature. It got to a point where I was going to hang myself.
In Marty's mind, suicide was the only option. What he was suffering was full-blown depression.
When you get depressed, all you think about is that must be something definitely wrong with you as to why things go wrong. And all you do is you just spend the whole time thinking negatively about yourself and painting yourself out to be really bad and hopeless, useless, and all this sort of thing. And you end up spending that much time thinking, you physically make yourself sick. I mean, I got to the stage where My head just felt like it was going to explode. I'd just been thinking that much, and it did make me physically ill. And the only way that I could stop that was to kill myself.
He came perilously close. In the end, he realised he couldn't do that to his family, but he knew he was desperately in need of help.
So the next step was to go off and seek medical help, which I did. And through the cognitive therapy and everything, I've come through it fairly well. I wouldn't say it's totally disappeared. I still get a bit depressed sometimes, but now I know how to handle it, to cope with it a bit more and think a bit more positively.
Today, Marty is still on medication, and he's taken a job in the resource industry, 2 weeks at the mine site, a week back at the farm. It's not ideal, but it's helping him get back on his feet. The secret, Marty now knows, is talking and sharing his worries.
Talking to mates is the only way to go. It's a cheap option and it's always fail-safe. It works. It works for me.
These days, Peter Boyle knows all about depression, but not so long ago he had no idea how unwell he was. His eyes were opened when he went to visit a neighbour who'd suffered a breakdown and was just home from hospital.
So when I found out he was coming home, I just dropped in, had a chat, and we talked for probably 2.5 hours, and I found that I was nearly as at the same level of stress that he was, and so I got a lot of benefit out of it myself.
It was the wake-up call Peter needed. He was so wrapped up in running his farm, he'd seriously neglected his health.
Locking it up, keeping it to yourself, it seemed to be, not sharing it with anybody else. It wasn't anything to do with tough times or anything, it was just letting things build up and not getting rid of them.
For Peter, sharing his feelings and experiences with his neighbour were crucial to beginning his own recovery.
And so I also rang a couple of his friends, and they went over and saw him over the next couple of days, and then we all caught up at a clearing sale, and I found out they had very similar experiences to me, that they all didn't realise that they were so close to just crossing that line. If you ask someone to help you, you're actually helping them. You'll find 9 times out of 10 you're actually helping them, because it's a rewarding experience for both of you.
At the heart of the Working with Warriors program is one very important message. If you're feeling unwell, please ask for help. Talking to someone you trust or seeing your family doctor is a crucial first step.
We often say that a problem shared is a problem halved, and it is true that when we talk about it, we actually find we're not the only one in the district or the only one in the industry that's going through these difficult times. By talking about it, we actually build some resistance to going to that next step of saying, well, woe is me, this is self-destructive, I can't be bothered dealing with this, because collectively we can actually make a difference.
The Working with Warriors program has a simple 10-point checklist to help identify signs of depression.
Sometimes the signs are about feeling shaky inside. I'm just not comfortable about the future. Now, you don't have to have all these 10 things going wrong in your life to say, well, I might have some symptoms about depression. I might be struggling with the life I'm living. You can have 2 or 3 of those things going on, and if you feel that that's abnormal, that's when you need to talk to a mate, seek some help, go and do something about it.
Don't close down and don't try and solve it yourself. Once you start to come under pressure, don't try and solve it yourself, because you just close right down and it gets worse and worse and worse. So open up and throw the pride or the ego out the window.
These days, I always go and have a health check-up prior to harvest and prior to cropping. So I go twice a year and just, you know, like I go and he checks me blood pressure and does the usual thing, and then I ask him how he's going. It's interesting how I've changed my attitude.
The most important thing was that what we were dealing with at the time, we dealt with. And if we couldn't handle it ourselves, We found somebody that helped us handle it.
Going in and seeing a psychologist is just like popping the bonnet and he has a look through, sorts things out, get your timing right and you're away. But if you ignore that, well, you can end up in big trouble.
This, I think, is a unique program that I think can potentially add greatly to the programs that are out there already, because there's nothing like it in any of the other states. So part of why we've taken some initiative here is that you know, by producing this DVD, we're in a position to demonstrate to a whole range of different people what this program's about and how it works.
Keep putting out the message to communicate, talk to one another, you're not alone. We're all there to help each other. Just put your hand up.